All right. Good morning. We're looking at Nehemiah 11 and 12 when, as this text calls it, the holy city is in need of having people move into it and do that difficult work of going into a city that's in the process of being rebuilt. And then we're going to see a celebration for the dedication of the temple. And so just as a reminder of well, I'll just bring this up quick. We got one more class, Lord willing, on Nehemiah. Next week we'll be looking just at chapter 13. Most of the time we've been looking at about 2 chapters at a time. But next week we're going to slow down and look at this final chapter in Nehemiah, where Nehemiah has to return back to Jerusalem after being gone for so many years. And the people have gone back into their sinful ways, and we're going to see some strong confrontations that Nehemiah has to make to the people. And then the next quarter starts, and in these classes, 2 weeks from now, Lord willing, we will begin studying the Holy Spirit. So that is the plan for that. Structure, outline of the book of Nehemiah, just remind you that the first 7 chapters show the people reconstructing the walls. How many days did it take to build the walls? 52. Same amount of weeks as there are in a year, is the way that I remember that. And so what was some of the opposition that they had while they were reconstructing the walls? Tobiah and Sanballat, and they're trying to get into the heads of the people, trying to scare them with threats of various kinds. And then there's also some internal problems where some of the Jews are taking financial advantage of other Jews, and Nehemiah has to deal with those sorts of things in chapter 5. And one of the overarching lessons that we see from this is that whenever we try to do what the Lord has asked us to do, there will always be people that want to stop us. Satan does not like it when people are doing what's right. And so they finish the work still, and then in chapters 8 through 13, now that the physical walls have been built, Ezra is going to return, and he's going to re-instruct the people, and there's a lot of Bible study that's happening, and we're looking in that general section of the book. We've been asking this question, how the book of Ezra and Nehemiah apply today, and the idea of this being that exile in the Old Testament was away from the presence of the Lord. And so to come out of exile means that you're coming back to the Lord. We're constructing things after having left the camp of Satan. And we're trying to build a heavenly city, not a physical city. And so we draw metaphorical lessons from the things that they're doing in this book. And that's the angle that we've been looking at it as we've been studying through this. I want to point out, just in the context, a couple things about the context that we're looking at. Back in Nehemiah chapter, I think it was around chapter 8 or so, or 7. It was 7. We have this statement here. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. Quite a contrast, by the way, to the book of Joshua. When they go into the promised land, did they have to build anything? No. When they're returning from exile, they have to reconstruct everything, though. And so Nehemiah looks at this, and he then, chapter 7 goes on to talk about the list of people who had returned, so he can start to understand exactly all who's there. But that started a parenthetical sort of section where from chapters 8, 9, and 10, Ezra comes and he conducts all of these Bible studies with these people, and then they have this covenant renewal. And now in chapter 11, verse 1, we go back to this idea of populating this city. So in Nehemiah 11:1, now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of 10 remained in the other towns. And so we're picking up what chapter 7, verse 4 introduced. And so that's where that parenthetical section comes of. These people were engaged in deep Bible study, and with all of this new, renewed heart and passion for the Lord, now there's going to be people that are going to do the hard work of going and resettling into this city that's in the process of being rebuilt. So the outline of what we're looking at this morning is 11:1 through 12:26 is this idea of resettling back into Jerusalem. And then in 12:27 to 47, you have the rejoicing of the people over the dedication of the walls. Anything you guys want to say before we start looking at chapter 11? We're not going to read all of these passages, but we're going to highlight a few things. And so let's begin in chapter 11 with them resettling. And let's look at the first two verses of chapter 11. Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of 10 remained in the other towns. And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered to live in Jerusalem. All right. Who already lived in Jerusalem? Yeah, some of the leaders did. So these people are setting an example. What would be difficult about living in Jerusalem in this time period? They're rebuilding, and what else? Yeah, like this wouldn't be, it kind of looks like an apocalyptic war zone. I mean, the places are not all rebuilt yet. It's not like everything looks really nice. And we've already seen that there's enemies for the people. So to live in Jerusalem is a risky thing. But I like that the leaders are already there. There's some leaders that are there. And they've kind of set this tone for the people, leading by example in that way. And so in order to repopulate the city, what is it that they're going to do in verse 1? Yeah, cast lots, and so it's going to be like a lottery, or what is that thing that they did in the military for Vietnam? Draft. They're going to like draft people to go live in there, and so it's like the idea of a tithe. And what's some of the challenges of moving from one place to another? Yeah, leaving family behind. What else? Yeah, how are you going to get your mail now? There's a lot of headaches in making sure that the government knows your new address. The government still doesn't acknowledge our new address, so I can't do that yet. The new surroundings, new people that you're around, building new relationships. And so these people these people had gotten accustomed, I guess, to living out in the more rural areas. And now they're going to have to be kind of squeezed into the city, and this is going to create some more difficulties for them. But in this context, there are some people who are willingly offering to do that. How do the fellow Jews acknowledge or treat those who willingly offered to do this? Yeah, they commend the people. So that would mean that there would maybe be a little less drafting that would have needed to happen, because there's some people that are offsetting some of the people that have to be conscripted to do this. And so one thing that we could ask ourselves from this is, do we ever willingly serve in hard ways? Are there ever times where in this local church where there's some kind of task or thing that needs to be accomplished, and it's kind of hard to find a lot of volunteers, but there's still a handful of people that are willing to do that? We would honor such people and thank God that there are such people in our midst. And so you can imagine those people and their willingness to do that and how encouraging that would have been. So that sets in motion these lists of people that are going to move in. Any comments or questions through verse 2, though? Okay. So from verses 4 to 24, you've got 468 people from Judah, you've got 928 people from Benjamin, and you've got 1192 priests. And I want to highlight something, and I have it on the notes up there, but some of these people that move into Jerusalem, they're described in interesting ways. Look at the end of verse 6. They were valiant men. The end of verse 8, they were men of valor. Or verse 14, they were men of valor. What do you think that means? Brave. Normally we think of bravery and being a person of valor to be something that involves military sorts of contexts, and surely there would have been physical threats for the people here. But valor means that you're willing to do difficult things when other people are not willing to do it. Or if you're asked to do something difficult, I will go ahead and do this and show the courage that I need to show right now. So those are the descriptions of some of these people that are coming here. And then verses 15 to 24 to show you some of the Levites and the temple staff. There's that many Levites, there's gatekeepers, there's temple servants. They're making sure to not ignore at all the work of worship in Jerusalem. And so, anything you guys want to say through verse 24? All right, I don't have much to say about verses 25 to 36, but this is the resettling of Judah and Benjamin, and I'll just give you a little sampling of some of this. Look at 11:25. And as for the villages with their fields, some of the people of Judah lived in Kiriath Arba and its villages, and in Dibon and its villages, and in Jekab Zeel and its villages. And so it just goes on and talks about these other people that resettled in Judah and Benjamin as well in the same context here. So there's this shifting of the people back towards the city. Yeah. Yep. Yes, and it's like the end of 1 Corinthians where it says, be ye like men, I think in the King James. Act like men. Why would Paul say at the end of 1 Corinthians, act like men? That sounds kind of sexist against women. What does it mean in the Bible to be a man? You do hard things when other people don't want to do that. That's the point of it's a men as opposed to being a child that shirks responsibility. Is more the contrast. It's not men versus women, but men versus being a child, I think is the idea. These people are men. They're doing difficult things. All right, and one of the lessons for us, Ephesians 4:15 and 16, when the Bible talks about a healthy church, rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. A healthy church is one where everybody has figured out what their gifts are, what their talents are, and they use those things for the Lord's purposes in that local congregation. In this context, people are figuring out where they're going to fit in Jerusalem. You got the gatekeepers, the singers, all of these people doing the things that God has tasked them to do. Any thoughts or comments through this? Okay, one other part about the resettling is there's this, Nehemiah records the priests and the Levites from the first return, going back to some of the things that we saw all the way back in Ezra chapter 2. And so I'm just going to put the outline of this on here. The priestly families during the return, the Levitical families during the return, verses 10 and 11 give you kind of a panoramic view of the high priests from this era of time. And then you have the heads of the second generation after returning, and then the heads of the Levitical families. Now, it's a list of a bunch of people. I think one of the reasons why this would be in this context is because it's going to connect with the roles of the leaders in the next section. In the next section, they're going to have the dedication for the walls, and that's going to involve musicians doing their work and priests doing their work. And so before they dedicate this, it's like Nehemiah's looking through all of the people to make sure that these people are Levites, so that we're going to do this dedication exactly the way that we need to. And as another note, there's 12 years between verses 26 and 27 before they actually dedicate the wall. So perhaps it took a while to repopulate, to get the city how they wanted it before they're finally going to rededicate it. But that's going to get us into the dedication ceremony, which I want to spend most of the time with. Is there anything you guys want to say through chapter 12, verse 26? Okay. Let's spend the rest of our time then on this section on the rejoicing of the people because of the temple being done and the walls being completed. So look at chapter 12, verses 27 to 30. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgiving and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the district surrounding Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites, also from Beth Gilgal and from the region of Geba and Osmaveth. For the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem, and the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. All right, here they are preparing for the dedication, and all throughout this text, you're going to see this great celebration from the people. There's going to be a lot of joy in this section. If we really understand what the Lord has done for us, what kind of mindset or emotions will we display? Gladness. Does that mean that I can never cry and I can never have sorrow? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that I do have this deep sense of joy. These people are going to be worshiping, and it's out of an outflow of their zeal for the Lord. They're very excited that the Lord has brought them to this point. These people are going to understand what God has done for them. Now, before they start doing all of this, in verse 30, they purify everything to make sure that they're ready for this. And maybe there's a couple lessons we can learn from that. We always have to be sensitive to defilements before we can worship. We have to make sure that, there's no lead. These people that are going to be leading the procession, we'll say more about that in just a moment, they have to be pure. Everything's got to be pure. You're not going to properly lead people without purity yourself. 1 Timothy 2:8, Paul talks about the men should pray lifting what kinds of hands? Holy hands. What does that mean? I washed my hands really good with soap this morning. What does that mean to have holy hands? Right, yeah. In the Bible, what is your hand, like your actions, your moral conduct? That it's people that are morally pure that should be leading in these kinds of ways. And so they're going to have these processions. But anything you guys want to say through verse 30 here? Yeah. Yes, and for these people in this overall context, they've been engaged in so much Bible study with Ezra. And they've seen so many things in the law that I think had been neglected for a while. They're keeping the Feast of Booths now. It's just so obvious to them what the Lord has done that they're just really enthusiastic. Now let's think about this question. Why don't we always realize how good we have it in the Lord? You mean physically? Like our physical blessedness causes us to maybe miss the spiritual things? Yeah, good. What else? Yeah, we live in a country where people are always wanting more and more and more, and maybe that's just part of how humans are generally. But we don't maybe think enough about what we do have and have gratitude for that, and we think about the things that we wish we had, whatever, and that causes us not have the joy that we ought to have. What else? Yeah.
I believe Satan's at work all the time, and when you are trying to be faithful and do what's right, he's working just as hard trying to pull you away with whatever personally I'm attracted to or whatever my weaknesses are. He's always working on that.
Yes, good. Anything else on that? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, this is a crucial point here. Do you think the Israelites, the Jewish people who had returned from exile, realized that their city was dilapidated and that they were in a really bad situation, and by the Lord's help, we've rebuilt this place? They're not going to forget where they came from. One of the reasons that we don't have the kind of joy and gladness we ought to have is because we've forgotten where we've come from. We were dilapidated. We didn't deserve anything before the Lord except to go to hell. But by His grace and His mercies towards us, We've been allowed to return and rebuild. This is burned in their minds physically. How often do we think about that spiritually? What do you think of yourself before you were ever a Christian, when you were in exile? Do you think of yourself as somebody who just needed a little minor tune-up, but you were already a pretty good person? Whenever there's kids growing up in Christian families that come to me asking me if I think they're ready to be baptized, I have one question for them. And this one question basically tells me everything I need to know. And the one question that I ask them is, do you think you're a good person? And if they say, well, yeah, I think I'm a pretty, you're not ready. You are not ready. Because if you really understood who you were before God, you would not be comparing yourself to other people thinking that you're a pretty good person. Yeah.
You're arguing semantics with a child. I don't agree with that. I want my children to think they are good people. Why would I want my child to think he's a bad person? But that doesn't mean I don't want him to understand what sin is and what his relationship with God is.
I'm just thinking about Acts 2, where when they say, what should we do about having killed Jesus? And you were to ask those 3,000 Jews who were baptized, do you guys think you're good people? Well, maybe on one perspective, but when you look at other people or something like that, not that you're trying to destroy anybody's self-esteem or something like that, but the idea is before God, you need to be struck with the reality of your sin. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and you could ask it that way. You could say, before God, do you think you're justified?
Sure. Yeah.
There was a time several years ago that was at that stage where you would want to ask them for sure, if they were ready. And the question was asked, if Jesus was standing at the door, what would you say to him? And he dropped his head and he said, I would tell him I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's all about.
Right.
Recognizing that we owe God
Right.
apology for the person that we've been, and we're going to serve him now in a different way in our life.
Right. But if we start to think of ourselves as really great people apart from the Lord, it's going to kill our zeal for him because we'll think we've earned everything and we're owed something. And as long as we understand that God is not indebted to us, but we're indebted to the Lord, that's one of the things that fuels our gratitude. And so these people, I think in this context, realize those things. And so now we're going to see these two processions that are going to celebrate the dedication of the temple. So look starting in verse 31. Then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed two great choirs that gave thanks. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gate, and after them went Hoshea and half the leaders of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah, and certain of the priest's sons with trumpets, Zechariah the son of Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, son of Mattaniah, and Micaiah, son of Zakur, son of Asaph, and his relatives, Shemaiah, Azarel, Malalai, Galalai, Mai, Nathanael, Judah, and Hanani, with the musical instruments of David. We'll talk more about those in just a moment, the man of God. And Ezra the scribe went before them. At the fountain gate they went up straight before them by the stairs of the city of David, at the ascent of the wall above the house of David, to the water gate on the east. The other choir of those who gave thanks went to the north, and I followed them with half the people on the wall above the tower of the ovens to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, and by the gate of Yeshanah, and by the fish gate, and the tower of Hananel, and the tower of the 100 to the sheep gate, and they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. So both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me. And the priests Eliakim, Messiah, Minimin, Micaiah, Elonai, Zechariah, and Hananiah with trumpets, and Messiah, Maaseiah, Shemaiah, Eleazar, Uzi, Jehonan, Melchijah, Elam, and Ezer. And the singers sing with Jeriziah and their leader. And they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God made them rejoice with the great joy. And the women and the children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. All right. What's happening on this, first of all, is that you have the leaders on the wall. You imagine, like, if you're living in Jerusalem, if you're one of the citizens in Jerusalem, maybe you've come from some distance to watch this moment. You got all these leaders standing on the wall. This thing is strong. This thing is something that we can stand on and do this procession on. And so while they're up there, there's these two directions that these processions go. And you see it in verses 31, 38, and 40. One of the processions in verse 38 went south, led by Ezra. And then the other one went north, and Nehemiah is connected to that one. So somehow, some way, one of them is going clockwise, and the other one anti-clockwise or something. And they end up where? In verse 40. They end up at the house of the Lord. And so you can imagine they start at, I don't have a map up here, but you can imagine they start somewhere away from the house of the Lord, and then they do this procession where they get to the house of the Lord. They're going to make these sacrifices in verse 43. Do you guys have any thoughts or comments or questions just about the procession itself, though? Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah, well, I was Tobiah or Sanballat or one of them, I think in chapter 4, said, what you guys are building is so weak that if a fox jumped up this thing, the whole wall would fall apart. And now you got the exact opposite happening here. Good. Anything else on this so far? All right. In verse 43, anybody notice what words or concepts are repeated like 5 times in these verses? In this verse? Rejoicing. Why are they so happy or joyful? Yeah. What was that? Yeah, they were rejoicing because of what the Lord has done for them. Look at where we've come from. We were in exile for 70 years. We thought that God had forsaken us, but God has shown himself to be faithful through difficulties, through dark days, and now we've rebuilt this, and everything is turned around. It doesn't have the same glory that it did in the days of Solomon. But what does it say about their joy in this passage? Who else notices this? You know, the women and children are rejoicing. They're part of it as well. What else, though? What? Yeah, people are hearing it from far away. Now, ask yourself this question. If you were to meet some non-Christians, would they have any sense that you're a joyful person because of what the Lord has done for you? Now, sometimes when we think about joy and zeal, we can think that God is commanding a certain kind of personality. And so, there's some personalities that are just happy. And it's like, well, I guess those commands come easy to those people. God never commands a certain personality. Every personality has its own way of expressing zeal and its own way of expressing joy. What is joy, though? Yes, good. What are some ways that joy is seen in people? Yeah. Does the positive outlook mean that you can't see the difficulties, though? We wouldn't say that. We would, and you're not saying that. Yeah, ultimately it's going to be okay. We're going to do the work that we can do. Good. I thought so. The question was, how do you... Yeah, contentment. That I'm trying to think of some of the hymns that we sing. What was the hymn that was written by the guy that found out his family had died when he was on a ship or something? It is well with my soul. That Horatio Spufford or whatever, I think that was the guy's name. He found out that his whole family had died. I think they were on a ship and he was waiting for them to come. And then he penned the song, It Is Well With My Soul. It's not like he's not crying. It's not like the pain isn't real, but nothing's going to take away this deep contentment that I have. How else would we demonstrate joy? Yeah, gratitude. How thankful are you? Now, if let's say that you break your back at work 1,000 hours a week and you get your paycheck, are you going to be super thankful for it? No, you're going to be like, I earned that. But what if your boss gave you like a $200,000 bonus just randomly, and you know you didn't earn it? What's your attitude going to be? You see the point? These people in this context have worked very hard, but they know they didn't earn anything that they have. And if we think we've earned anything that we have before the Lord, we'll think that we're owed something and we will not have the gratitude. Ingratitude comes from thinking you deserve more than you have. What other things could we say about the joy?
I've got a nephew that did such a good job for his boss here a few years ago. He gave him $1 million bonus.
Is there a punchline to that?
Well, gratitude.
Okay.
He shared it with me.
Oh, that's nice. That's good. All right, anything else you guys want to say about that? Yeah.
When it says consider it all joy, and it's talking about the circumstances that you may be in,
Yeah.
which are not joyful per se, but the attitude is that with the Lord, all things are possible and I can get through anything.
Yeah, and in James 1, through the trials I'll be strengthened and I'll grow. And so there's things to be joyful about, but you have to consider it joy. Like if I'm eating a cinnamon roll, I don't have to consider how good it is. If I'm eating something that's like healthier, but I don't like, I have to consider that it's good for me. And that helps me get through it. And so you have to consider that during the trials, that this might not be pleasant right now, but through it all, I'm going to be made better from it. All right, anything else you guys want to say about the joy and how the people hear all of that? All right, look at, we're going to come back and think about what it says about the instruments of David. But in verses 44 to 47, there's these comments about maintaining the temple. So that day, men are appointed for the offerings. People are rejoicing over their ministers. The Levites are being supported now, which they're going to neglect in chapter 13. David and Solomon, the instructions that David and Solomon had given are being followed regarding the temple. They're not seeking to do a bunch of new things. They're just doing what it is that David and Solomon had commanded through the Lord. And look at verse 47. In all the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah, they gave daily portions for the singers and the gatekeepers, and they set apart that which was for the Levites, and the Levites set apart that which was for the sons of Aaron. All right, so it's not, in this context, they have this great day of celebration, but what are they committing themselves to do on a regular basis? Yeah, keeping these instructions that are going to take care of the Levites. So they went beyond the moment, that one moment of joy. It'd be like, if you have a really encouraging gospel meeting or there's a really encouraging week at a camp or something, people always warn the kids as they're leaving the camp, don't let this zeal that you've captured this week just last for a couple days and fizzle out. These people are really passionate on the day of dedication, but they're dedicating themselves to continuing to do the right thing, which they will revert on in the next chapter. But it reminds me of Acts 2:47, where it says, the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. A local church that has a certain evangelistic push during one part of the year is not a healthy church. I think if you have, like, if there's certain times like gospel meeting that's especially for non-Christian visitors, sure. But my point is, what should be part of a local church community is that we're habitually trying to reach people. And we don't just wait for one time of the year to do it. Day by day, people were being saved in Acts 2 because these people were zealous for the Lord. Their joy was overspilling. Other people saw these things, and it caused them to want to be part of that community. And so these people are going beyond the excitement of the moment, and they're committing themselves to a daily thing. Anything else you guys want to say about that? All right. We have to do this because this is one of the texts that lets us do this. I want to spend the rest of the time just talking about the instruments of David. Verses 24, 36, and 45, I'll bring up the instruments of David. And this is because at this local church, we don't use instruments, and people will look at this and say, well, they had instruments in this passage, and there's instruments all over the Old Testament, so what do we do with this? Anybody know the first time in the Bible that we read about the instruments of David? It's in 1 Chronicles 16, verse 1, and then verses 4 through 6. And this is when they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant back. And it says this, and they brought in the ark of God and set it inside the tent that David had pitched for it, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before God. Verse 4. Then he appointed some of the Levites as ministers before the ark of the Lord to invoke, to thank, and to praise the Lord, the God of Israel. Asaph was the chief, and second to him were, and then it lists out a bunch of names, who were to play harps and lyres. Asaph was to sound the cymbals, and Benaiah and Jehaziel, the priests, were to blow trumpets regularly before the ark of the covenant of God. This is the first time that we read about the instruments of David. Before 1 Chronicles 16, does anybody know the only instruments that were commanded? Numbers chapter 10, the silver trumpets. And for, I forget how many years it was, I think it's around 400 years. There's no other instruments until suddenly David has all these instruments. So here's the question. Where did David get this idea? Because in Nehemiah, they're going, we have to do the instruments of David. Instruments of David, those are the ones that we do. Where did David ever get this idea to introduce these instruments when up to this point, the only instruments God commanded were the two silver trumpets? Anybody know? All right, there's one passage that shows us, and it is in 2 Chronicles 29, verses 25 to 27. This is another context, people restoring worship back to the Lord, things like that. And he stationed the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, harps, and lyres, according to the commandment of David, and of Gad the king's seer, and of Nathan the prophet, for the commandment was from the Lord through his prophets. The Levites stood with the instruments of David, and the priests with the trumpets. Then Hezekiah commanded that the burnt offering be offered on the altar. And when the burnt offering began, the song to the Lord began also, and the trumpets accompanied by the instruments of David, king of Israel. All right, where did David get this idea? Was David just a really cool pioneer, and he's like, I kind of like that thing, and I like that. Let's go ahead and add those into worship, and that'll be cool. Where did he get his ideas to worship in this way? God was the one that told him to do it. Now, we don't have the story in the Bible where God came to David and said, do these things, but this is what God wanted David to do. So, when the two silver trumpets were used, who told them to do it? God. When the instruments of David are introduced, who told him to do it? Was there any point, and then when the people are trying to restore their worship back to the Lord, what are they following? David. Do you think there would have been some cool instruments in Babylon that they hadn't ever seen before? Like there's like this cool thing that kind of looks like a guitar. We'd never heard that before, and maybe we can do like some cool new ways of singing and all this sort of thing. Are they trying to take their cultural things that they've learned and try to add some of those things to it? They're not doing any of that. Instead, hundreds of years later, they're going, let's just do what David told us to do. And so some observations from this. Instruments were always under the authority of God. They never had the liberty to do what they pleased. This is talking about specifically worship at the temple, corporate worship at the temple. Um, and the instruments of David are specified. And so it's not enough to say, well, they were using instruments here, so what's the big deal for us today? Well, when you look at these passages, God was the one saying, this is what you use. Now, let's think about some parallels with the sacrifices. Could they use any animal that they wanted in the sacrificial laws? You know, I kind of want to offer a bat today. No, they don't have the right. God told them what to do. If we can use the Old Testament to justify instruments in worship, why not animal sacrifices? Because in that Chronicles passage, when were they using the instruments? When the offerings were being made. Now, they're in Nehemiah, it's when they're dedicating the temple, and then they dedicating the wall, and then they go to the temple and make sacrifices. So they're in the context of those kinds of things. If you want to justify instruments in worship from the Old Testament, you also, by that line of reasoning, should be able to justify animal sacrifices. Any thoughts or comments so far? And I understand, by the way, that this passage in Nehemiah 11 and 12, the main point of this passage is not to have this discussion that we're having. But it's one of the passages that bears reference on how they used instruments, and it becomes a question that people have today. All right, notice another thing. There's a lot of detailed instructions in the Old Testament on what instruments to use. And in the New Testament, we're only told to sing. Now, all right, yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, this wasn't some kind of free-for-all. Right. Yes, so if you see all of these detailed instructions in the Old Testament and then just sing in the New Testament, do we really want to go beyond what's written? Should we be comfortable with that is the point. All right, here's a couple counter arguments people will bring up. Some people will say, well, I have a talent. Why can't I use my talent for the Lord? What could you say to that? Yeah, why does it have to be in this setting that you play your instrument? Nobody's saying you can't use your talent, but there's a certain context in which, what if somebody here is really good at making a special kind of bread with yeast in it? And like, well, I have a talent, why can't we use that for the Lord's Supper? Well, yeah, you can you can use your talents in their proper context. And if you take this, what if I'm really good at shooting archery? How about I do this grand demonstration for a sermon? Like, you know, the Greek word for sin is to miss the mark, and it's an archery term. And I went down there and I set up a target, and it's, oh, so exciting. This was such a dynamic Sunday morning. He brought a bow and arrow to church. Cool. Not in this context. So, yeah, you can have your talents, but you subject them to the context in which God wants you to use them. What about this one? What about in the book of Revelation, where in the heavenly realm there's instruments and there's harps and there's all these things, the 24 elders bowing down and all these, what about that? Have you guys ever heard that one before? All right, what's the problem with that? Yes, and there's also a temple, there's bowls of incense, there's a golden altar. You want to use those things too? If you think those things are saying we better use those things, then how about we use all of the things that are brought up there? And like you were saying, this is a heavenly vision. The point of those passages is not to give us instructions about how we worship in a local church. And so again, the point of Nehemiah 11 and 12 is they're dedicating the wall. It's telling us how they did these things. They're very meticulous to go back to the law. We should learn a lesson from that it doesn't matter how many years have passed, this is never outdated. But because of our cultural context and the questions that people have, I think this passage does bear reference on how they used their instruments and how that could be informational for us today. But do you guys have any thoughts or comments about anything we've talked about? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting going back to that Chronicles passage. If you read on in verse 30,
Yeah, okay. Anything else? All right, so Lord willing, next week we're going to see Nehemiah pull people's hair out because he's so mad at them, and it's a really fun chapter. So be ready for that.